So we'll start off by renaming this default test class, and we'll call it player character should. We'll also go and rename the physical file here, so it matches the class name. Notice here in this default test class, we've already got a using directive to the XUnit namespace, and this is going to give us access to XUnit items, such as this fact attribute here. That's going to indicate that this method is in fact a test. Let's also go and rename this default test method, and we'll call it be inexperienced when new. So a player character should be inexperienced when new. Let's go and create an instance of our player character. And here I'm going to use the naming convention SUT, which is an acronym that stands for System Under Test. This can be an easy way of keeping track of exactly what's being tested by this test. So we'll go and create a new instance of our player character. So let's build this to make sure there's no errors, and the build succeeds. We can now go and execute this first test. We can do this using Visual Studio's Test Explorer. So if we open up the Test Explorer window here, notice we've got our test showing. The player character should be inexperienced when new test. There's a number of different ways that we can filter and sort this list of tests. For example, if we come up here and click this group by option, we can group by namespace, by class, and also by project if we've got more than one XUnit test project. So for the minute, we're just going to leave this as class. As we add additional tests to the player character should class, they'll show up underneath this player character should group. So to run all of the tests, we could click run all here. But if we just want to run an individual test, we can right click on it and choose run selected test. So let's go ahead and do that. And we can see the test executes, and the test result here, test passed. In addition to executing tests via Test Explorer, we can also execute them using the .NET Core command line interface. If we switch to the command window now, and just do a directory, we're in the root directory of the solution. We can change directory to the GameEngine.tests directory, and then we can use the .NET test command. If I hit enter, we can see that we get the build started, and then the test discovered, and the tests executed. We can see here that we've discovered a total of 1 tests in the test project, and of those 1 tests, 1 has passed, 0 have failed, and 0 have been skipped. Let's head back to Visual Studio. But there's a problem with this test in that we don't have any asserts. Because we don't have any asserts, this test will always pass and in effect is a pointless test. In the next module, we'll finish writing this test and we'll learn how we can add asserts to decide whether our tests pass or fail. So that brings us to the end of this first module. In this module, we started off by looking at some of the reasons why we might want to write automated tests in the first place. So we learned that automated tests help us find errors sooner and how this can reduce development costs, and also how automated tests can result in happier development teams, hopefully resulting in fewer production outages and fewer out-of-hours callouts. We got an overview of the different test types, so we learned about the quick-to-execute unit tests, right through to the slow-to-execute user interface tests, and how unit tests are less brittle, and functional UI tests can be more brittle. We covered testing behavior versus testing private methods. We learned that generally it's a good idea to test the public interface and the behavior of the class, rather than tightly coupling the tests to implementation details. We learned about the 3 logical phases that tests may have, the arrange, act, and assert phases. And then we started off our introduction to XUnit.NET. So we learned that XUnit.NET is a testing framework that works in conjunction with a test runner to execute our tests. We learned how we can create a new XUnit.NET test project in Visual Studio, or once again at the command line, and then we started off writing our first test. We saw how we can execute this test at the command line, or using Visual Studio's Test Explorer. Join me in the next module when we'll go and complete our first test by adding an assert. We'll also learn how to write asserts against different types of results, such as strings, objects, booleans, collections, and object types.